Thank you.
We had a little bit of a technical issue that's been sorted out now. So, to begin, on this occasion of the Independence Day, we at the Pink Elephant had come up with an idea to do a series of episodes on the Indian military history. Since it was the Independence Day, we thought the most apt would be to start from the 1947-48 operations. And for that, we have organized this webinar. On this webinar, we have a panel of gentlemen, very known military historians, authors, writers, who have a treasure trove of information to share on the subject that we will be speaking about. To begin with, I'll just quickly introduce the panel. We have with us Colonel Avnish Sharma, who was commissioned in the Army Corps in December 1980. Colonel Avnish had taken premature retirement in 2007, and after that he has settled in Chandigarh. He is a graduate of the Defence Services Staff College at Wellington. He has a lot of experience of having served on in the conflict regions in our country, along the Kashmir border, along the Punjab border in the northeast. Colonel Avnish is also a guest columnist with the Hindustan Times and also writes for the Tribune newspaper. His writing has always been very, ridden with humor. It's been on the lighter side, but also he has also handled a lot of information regarding Indian military history. Colonel Avnish has also introduced the Clarion Call Theatre, which is part of the Military Literature Festival, which has been organized for the last 3 years in conjunction with the Punjab government and the Chandigarh administration. Colonel Avnish has very much been a part of the Military Literature Festival through the years. He has been participating in panels over there. He has also been a regular participant in the Kasoli Literary Fest, along with other literary fests and organizations which are there in Chandigarh. Moving on, our second panel member is Mr. Mandeep Singh Bajwa. He is a very, very well-known military historian, has encyclopedic knowledge of the Indian Army, its units, its history. He comes from a very renowned family of warriors who have a very long tradition of having served our country in almost all conflicts if we talk about the last 70 to 80 years. It's indeed a pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Thank you.
Moving on, our youngest panel member is Mr. Sagat Shonik. He's working in the corporate sector. He is an old scenarian, and he has also been writing and authoring articles for a very long time. In fact, one of the greatest things which Sagat has done was author a series of articles for the Fauji India magazine called the Untold Battlefield Stories, which was a series of articles which showcased the heroic efforts of our soldiers, sailors and airmen who have otherwise been missed by the fog of war or by the trials and tribulations of time. The series of articles which Sagat had written has now taken shape in the form of a coffee table book called Untold Battlefield Stories, which is all these articles and other writings by various other military historians put in one book, which I would recommend for every at least youngster in our country to go through. It is again a treasure trove of information, of heroic tales of men which have otherwise skipped the popular narrative in military history. Moving on, today we shall be discussing the 1947-48 operations, which was the first conflict fought by the Indian Army post our independence in 47. The webinar has been divided in various subparts, wherein we will be talking to our panel members one by one, and also discussing the contribution of the Indian Army, of the Indian Air Force, the situation in which they were mobilized and had to fight this battle. Perhaps at no other time in military history has an army and air force been made to fight a battle with almost no intelligence on ground, almost no support in terms of lines of communication on the ground, and having to fight in one of the toughest terrain possible when we talk in terms of warfare. So moving on, It's indeed a pleasure, sir, to have you with us, all three of you. Um, when we talk about the 47, 48 operations, it's very important to understand why the war started, how the war started, what was the historical backdrop in which this, conflict owes its origins to. So, Colonel Sharma, I would request you to please elaborate on the historical perspective of the lead up, the run up on how the war started in 47 finally.
Thank
Sir,
you,
all
Sudesh.
yours.
Good afternoon, Jai Hind, and happiest greetings on our 74th Independence Day. Look, I must confess, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Crystal clear.
I must confess at the outset that I'm not historian by any standards, unlike other four panelists, but I'm fascinated by history. I find history is like an ocean, it's deep, it's not totally explored. It has many inputs, some substantiated, some non-substantiated, some fictitious, and most of them facts. But the very fact there is no.
So sorry to interrupt you. Could you please speak a little louder, sir? Your speech is getting a little low.
Okay, okay. Can you hear me now?
Sir. Yes, sir. Much better, sir.
Okay, okay, okay. So what I was saying that it's like an ocean, it's deep, it's not fully explored, with a lot of input. Some of them are, substantiated, some are not. Some are facts and some are fiction. Most of them facts, though. But one must remember that there is no smoke without fire. So anything that happens in the past, it does leave a. Now, coming directly to what you asked me, the historical perspective, I view it as two parts. One is the chronological events, starting from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the second part would be the hammer and tong events, which were visible, which had an impact, which everybody could know. The first one, the chronological event, I start from the non-cooperation movement. That is, it started in 1920. There was a mass disobedience. Titles were asked not to be played. People stopped going to the schools, the colleges. There were no elections, things like that. I thought that was the first one, which was the closest, ignited a little of fire to clamor for freedom. The second one is again in 1930 was the civil disobedience, salt satyagraha, Dandi March by Mahatma Gandhi, which was quite momentous. In between, in 1919, there was Khilafat, which started in Turkey, which did not last for a long time, but it did have an effect. Then the Rowlatt Act of 1919, where they said, on suspicion, we'll put you behind the bar. And then the Simon Commission came in, which was totally composed of Britishers.
So could you please speak a little louder, sir? Again, the speech was getting a little low.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Sir, maybe come a little closer to the mic. That will improve things.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So, and then, Simon, 1928, when the Simon Commission came, it was largely composed of Britishers. So there was an objection to that, and there were problems, and there was and thereafter, of course, Lala Lajpat and people. The other thing which happened in 1942, which is closer to independence, is the Quit India movement, and then of course the World War II and this event. This is the event more or less which led to independence. Now, let me come to the hammer and tong, which is more interesting. You see, we'll start with, I'll mix up the American contribution also in our freedom struggle and the ultimate freedom, and of course the other events which get connected with it. Is it okay, my audio now?
Yes.
Okay. So, we go to 1895 when this American author and journalist Mark Twain came to India. He came here for 2 months. He visited about 16, 17 towns and cities, and he said India is a land of dreams and romance, fabulous wealth and fabulous poverty. He tried to highlight the culture of India, the Indians, which was not very pleasant, and it got vibrated in American society. He was anti-imperialistic. Then the Sikh farmers, after the First World War, the Sikh farmers and some ex-soldiers, they migrated to the US. They started interacting with the US people. The government got to know they are very industrious, navigatives, Punjabis are industrious, and they got to know what is happening here and what is the state of life, state of things in India. Uh, See, thereafter we had visits from Swami Vivekanand, Lala Lajpat Rai, Jayaprakash Narayan, Rabindranath Tagore, and it sensitized the American society to a large extent. Jallianwala Bagh 1919 was a momentous event, which again, found the freedom struggle to a large extent. Then and another major thing was the movement by Subhash Chandra Bose. Subhash Chandra Bose was a genius. I know most of us would know that he stood fourth in the ISP, the IAS that time exam. He was a brilliant guy, though he didn't join. And thereafter, 20,000 of INA volunteers were tried at the Red Fort. And these 20,000 comprised Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs. So it was a united emotion which got fanned at that point of time. Then Weval was here, Lord Weval, in 1946. He said now it is becoming untenable for Britishers to continue in India. I think one of the closest to this uh, this thing. In any case, Sunil, what had happened was that in 1930, on the last Sunday of January, that happened to be 26th January 1930, the Indian National Congress, our leaders, declared it as an Independence Day. And thereafter, every year, this used to be celebrated as a day with peaceful processions and things like that. They wanted to have the freedom also on the 26th January, but they didn't want to delay it from the 14th, 15th of August and shift it to 26th January. In any case, 26th January is being celebrated as the Republic Day.
Republic Day.
Beg your pardon?
Nothing, sir. Please continue.
Okay. Then in 1945, when the Labour Party came into power in Britain, they were part of the Congress, and that also helped to a large extent. Then the balance of power, after the World War II, shifted from Britain to USSR and the US. And Britain got relegated in its earlier demeanor, and in any case, economically, it has gone down quite badly. The princely states of Hyderabad, Kashmir, Patiala, they were also disenchanted with the British, during this time, and that was one of the reasons again which led to a faster independence. But I think the nail in the coffin was the Royal Indian Navy mutiny. The Indian sailors, a huge number, they mutinied against the Royal Navy, right from Karachi to Calcutta. It was it you know it was to do with food, clothing, and living and racial discrimination. But really fanned it, and the Britishers had to make a sincere, huge effort to control it. But that was, I thought, was the nail in the coffin at that point of time. But whatever you may say, I was reading this author, Dr. Nitin Kumar. He in 2008 wrote, he said, whatever the case may be, whoever struggled, whichever freedom fighter, went out of the way and sacrificed and worked for the freedom, but ultimately the guy who was responsible for India to get freedom post-state was Adolf Hitler. So now that was quite funny. He said Hitler had ravaged the economy of Britain and France to such an extent that they just could not continue hold of their colonies. They gave up Jordan, they gave up
Hmm.
Philippines, Palestine, Sri
Hmm.
Lanka. He had no choice. He says if Hitler was not there, probably. I mean, this is what Dr. Kumar says, and in the hindsight, if you think about it, he may not be wrong when he says that if Hitler was not there, we would have taken another 30 years to get independent. I mean,
In fact, sir,
that's
if I may just add, and your opinion also on it, uh, during the early years of the Second World War, as and when the Americans also jumped into the fray post Pearl Harbor, the first meeting that Churchill and Roosevelt had, the first important meeting that they had was the Atlantic Charter. Now, during that time, the Americans were also of the opinion that, post cessation of hostilities in World War II, the British Empire had to be dismantled, and this empire mongering by the old nation states of Europe had to be brought to an end. So they did not have tacit or support any other which way of the Americans also, and the global power game had also shifted by 45. So that also, sir, would have had a very, very big impact on the British way of thinking on how to deal with its empire, and most importantly, with India being the largest part of the empire.
perfect. You are absolutely right. In fact, Roosevelt was very keen that you took control of these colonies, and Churchill was adamant. He said, "Let the war end, and then we will see." He was dilly dallying, but then it became so untenable that he had to perforce. Otherwise, Churchill, I'm sure, his stance right from the beginning till the very end was of the opinion that he will continue. There is no problem.
So, moving on, what was the situation prevailing in Kashmir in 1947, in the months preceding independence being granted to India? And what was the mindset there that the Kashmiri royals had? And why was accession delayed by such a long time, whereas other princely states had been acceding in a due, in a time-bound manner, or they weren't dilly-dallying about it, they weren't vacillating on it?
Yeah, should I? You directing it to me?
Sir, and of course, if anybody also wants to add on to this.
Okay, okay. What we'll do is we'll discuss, uh, the geopolitical situation in India overall, because we cannot ignore that. We cannot go to Kashmir straight away. Generally,
Sir.
because, we'll talk about Muhammad Jinnah. Uh, he was earlier, was an ambassador of unity, pro-Muslim. He never wanted it to, have a separate state. Uh, and like I was reading Ramchandra Guha quite some time back, he'd written this book, India After Gandhi. And he's very frank. He's quite frank. I love his writing. It's a very fat book. It takes a lot of time
Sir.
to read, but really listed a lot of things which I found very interesting. He talked about Jinnah. He says, he was in his personal life. In claims of faith, he loved whiskey and at times ham sandwiches. Which was I thought quite frank about him. And then British also encouraged that there should be a separate state. And finally, the call for the separate state came in March 1940. When the Muslim League put out a resolution, it came out on the dawn that we are going to be separate. It is saying Indians, the Hindus and Muslims staying together in a common state may not work. So, and when the British left, there were about 500 distinct uh, pieces of territory in the country. In addition to the two nations that they carved out, and all these 500 things were they had their own chiefdom, they were princely states. And when Mountbatten came as the first Governor General of India, he was a very well-meaning guy. You know, whatever he did, but one thing which we discussed later, which goes against Mountbatten, but otherwise he was a well-meaning guy. He told the princely states, he said, I'm not going to protect or patronize you. And in support, he was in total support of Vallabhbhai Patel. And Vallabhbhai Patel had a very interesting, very proactive secretary, V.P. Menon, popularly called as Babu Menon. He was not an ICU person, but he was the force along with Vallabhbhai Patel for what they did. And so they started, he told Lord Mountbatten Patel, this is written in the Ramchandra Yuva book. He says, I want a full basket of apples. You know, what he meant was that basket of apples being the 565 princely states. I want them to get implemented in the Indian Constitution. And Mountbatten told him, if I give you 560, is the basket acceptable to you? And Vallabhbhai Patel said, okay, fine, we will do that. So what happened was that just before independence, uh, we had the process started. The first one to come on board was Bikaner, Baroda, and all that, and people. But just before independence, the trouble was given by three states. That is
Sir, sorry to interject. Could you speak a little louder, sir? We were getting comments that speech is a little low. So if you could speak a little louder.
Okay, I'll come a little closer. So they just before independence, three states gave problems. These princely states. One was Travancore, second was Bhopal, and third was Jodhpur. You know, there's a story that this guy went for the signatures of accession to the Jodhpur guy, the king of Jodhpur, the Maharaja of Jodhpur. And he took out his pistol and he put it on his kanpati and he said, there you give this document to me. But then somehow, I don't know, that is said prevailed. In the same breath, he put the pistol back and he signed the accession. These states were a problem, but they did. After the uh, after the after independence, the three ones of Hyderabad, Junagadh, and the third one, of course, Kashmir, were still not part of the Indian Constitution. And then, of course, whatever happened, you see that this thing. So this was as far as the geopolitical situation was concerned. Now, accession, the story is totally different. You know, Maharaja Hari Singh was another very interesting fellow, and he took over the throne in Kashmir in 1925. He was a fun-loving guy. He used to go and for pantry करता था वहाँ बम्बे में race courses, hunting. He had jungles, especially flooded with the hunt there, and he used to go there. And his fourth wife told one of the reporters, he said he has no time for people. You know, this was the kind of thing, and he wanted to remain part. He did not join India or Pakistan. He said we are going to remain independent state. We are not getting involved in aligning with either India or Pakistan unless, of course, we get threatened by their troops, and then we will see, slightly more inclined towards India though. And his prime minister earlier was Ramchandra Kak, and he remarked, he says, Maharaja wants to make Kashmir the Switzerland of the East. And that was the kind of thing. It was only when the raiders crossed Uri and they were between Uri and Baramulla on 22nd, 23rd of October 1947 that he wired India. And he said, please come and help me send troops and save Kashmir. And that is the time when Mountbatten said, he says, do not do that. He suggested, he said, do not do that till the time he signs the accession to India. And V.P. Menon, Babu Menon was in full to full. He found the situation was critical. He told the Maharaja, he says, आप जाइए जम्मू में सेफ्टी ऑफ जम्मू में जाइए वहाँ पैलेस में, क्योंकि यहाँ पे आपको खतरा है. And then flew back to Delhi on the 26th, April 26th, yeah, flew back to Delhi and along with the Prime Minister of Kashmir, and then came to Jammu, where he went to the palace of Hari Singh. Hari Singh was sleeping after the hardest journey, overnight journey from Srinagar to Jammu, and he woke him up and he said, please sign this accession. And it took him 5 minutes for the accession to be signed. And 27th of October, the Dakota flew off from Delhi, the Diwan Ranjit Rai's battalion, first Sikh. And the first Dakota landed at the Srinagar airport, which was flown by Gigi Patnaik, who later was the Chief Minister of Odisha. I think this is the story. Anybody wants to add something?
So, in fact, sir, since we are talking about move to the Kashmir part of it, Sagar, it might be useful to understand the geography of the area a little bit in terms of what routes were taken by the invaders and why was it so difficult for the Indian government and the Indian army to have reacted in those conditions because of the lack of road connectivity, etc., and all of those things. So, a brief word, Sagat, on the graphical part of things. Can you hear me, Sagat?
Yes, very well. So basically, Kashmir being a mountainous region with a number of rivers draining through it, is my map visible?
Map.
So I'll explain the situation through a map. It will make it much easier to understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, visible.
Yes. So, the Pir Panjal range, crosses almost parallel to the river Indus and so on, and it touches you at Baramulla and Uri. And between that is the Jhelum River and the Chenab, and the Chenab flows downwards, whereby all these locations like Poonch, Rajouri, and so on, they get isolated from Kashmir interior, and above that we have the Srinagar Valley. So geographically, there was a Domel Baramulla road that was coming in from Pakistan, but there was no road coming in from India. So the troops coming in from Pakistani side, they were mobilized on trucks and they had much better mobility compared to India. And so the geographic situation explains why it was easier for the Pak-sponsored tribal and Lashkars, which were also manned by Pakistani army, to come into this territory.
And to, I think, just briefly add, the Indian side only had the main road from Jammu to Srinagar was the road going through Banehal Pass. And Banehal Pass was covered with snow, heavy snow during the best of times. So during the months of October, November, it would have been well nigh impossible for the Indian army to mobilize swiftly and reach Srinagar by a road link. Whereas on the Pakistani side, the road links were very open, and in fact, I recall reading somewhere that the Pakistani officer who had conceived, planned, and executed the operation, Colonel Akbar Khan, had envisaged that the entire invasion and reaching Srinagar wouldn't have taken more than 24 hours. But we'll come more on that later on. Thank you, Sagat, for a very nice outlook on the geography or the topography of the area. Post that, now we come to the fighting forces who participated in the battle. Now, to understand what the Indian Army was in 1987, I feel it is very important to understand the army as it emerged from the Second World War. Emerging from the Second World War, it was a modern, industrialized army, highly trained, highly motivated, had fought a very long war against some of the toughest adversaries. So, Sagat, a short word on what the army was post World War II, what was the outlook, and all of those things.
Surely. If we can go on to the next slide, please.
Next slide. Slide next.
Okay, while we are at it, so broadly, the Indian Army, as it stood at the time of partition, it was split in a ratio of 2:1, with resources being almost equitably distributed amongst both Pakistan and India. There are a little debates around it, but largely what we got was 14 regiments out of the existing 21 regiments of cavalry. We got 9 out of 19 infantry regular battalions. I mean regiments. We got 11, followed by 6 out of the 10 Gurkha regiments, and 4 wartime raisings, that were the Sikhlai, Assam, Bihar, and Mahar MG regiments. Besides this, to equalize the sort of geographic sensibility and so on, the Frontier Corps was given to Pakistan with a large number of militia, scouts, and irregular forces that were already, operating in the Northwest Frontier Province. So it was equitable. There is a debate around, that the better cantonments were given to Pakistan since they were located there, and more training areas were that side, whereas India inherited arms and equipment manufacturing factories and so on. So largely, this is how the army was divided. I have a very heartwarming picture of a World War II veteran. If we can just share that on the screen, and then I'll take it further. Um, India also inherited a number of princely state forces that had experience in World War I and II. So we actually benefited a lot from the officers and the experience. Our junior leaders, the DCOs, the NCOs were very well trained. Majority of them were Burma, Italy, Africa veterans, and a number of them had operated in the Northwest Frontier, Waziristan, and such locations. So in terms of soldiering discipline, the man at arms was very well ordered. They knew all their procedures, the tactics on ground, and I think a lot of our generals also benefited from the experience in Burma, which I will highlight in the as we progress further. Uh,
Wonderful.
yeah, if we can just go to the slide, it will be really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're doing it up.
Yeah.
So could you please tell us something about the officer?
Yes, so this is Captain N.R. Abbott. I last met him when he was 96 years old. His experiences of walking through the jungles of Burma right up to Southeast Asia with, the Garhwal rifles in those days. And all those memories are fresh for him. And now, of course, God bless his soul, he's deceased. And if you could ask them, what did they have for breakfast yesterday, they may not remember. But what they did in Burma, the names I particularly remember Subedar Jodh Singh, who we talked so fondly about. These are the experiences they brought back to India. And if I, the next slide is even more interesting. If we go there. Yes. So India also inherited a number of higher command level leaders. We had 3 CEOs in Indian CEOs in Burma, who later on went to earn DSOs, which are roughly equivalent to Mahavir Chakras. And they were our major generals, they were our brigade commanders. In fact, Brigadier L.P. Sen commanded 161 Infantry Brigade, which was responsible for the defense of Srinagar in the initial days. He's pictured here standing second from left in the picture of 4 officers. And next to him is General Thimaya and General Thorat as well. All of them are really famous figures from the Kashmir War, and so is, of course, Field Marshal Cariappa.
Wonderful. That's like I said earlier at the very outset, the treasure trove of information that you have for any military history enthusiast, lover, student. I think it's absolutely amazing. Having met a veteran, 96 years old, who's fought in Burma, I think that's an amazing experience. Thank you so very much for sharing this. Uh, Mandeep sir, coming on to you, sir, and I was looking forward to this part of the discussion. So, sir, from what we gather, we read as students of military history, the British officers had a rather, I would say, from the Indian perspective, a rather negative role to play, and of course, from our adversarial perspective, a rather positive role to play. So, sir, why was this? And could you please tell us a little bit more about what was the role played by these men at the helm of affairs? Because both the armies were commanded by British officers, and the role played by them wasn't a very good one. So, sir, over to you, and please let us know what was the inside story.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me here, and
So, our
I'm
pleasure
glad
and honor.
to join this very eminent panel. The British establishment had decided, in '47 to make Pakistan its client state in the Indian subcontinent for various reasons. One was that they considered that the Pakistani would be more pliable than the more experienced, more erudite, more intellectually gifted Indian leaders. Secondly, through the Pakistan state, they hope to influence the Middle East, which was very important to their strategic interest because of oil, because of its location vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, which was I mean, as you know that the Cold War had already started, say about a year after the end of World War II. They were trying their best to help Pakistan and uh, promote Pakistan's interests. And you found that of course both sides had British officers, so they would each work for their own side. But where a British officer was in a position of authority where he could help Pakistan, they invariably did so. The most notorious or glaring case is that of Major Brown, coming out of the Gilgit Scouts, who Gilgit and Chitral, in fact, Baltistan were actually part of Jammu and Kashmir state, but given on lease to the British. The Gilgit Scouts were, of course, a unit, one of the civil armed forces maintained by the British. And he hoisted the Pakistan flag at Gilgit and claimed the area for Pakistan. And he openly went over to Pakistan, and they imprisoned the governor, Peter Gansara Singh, and they formed a militia, to strike out towards other areas in Baltistan and even beyond into Ladakh to capture those or conquer those areas for Pakistan. That is one thing. Of course, the officers who were part of the Pakistan Army, British officers like Gracie and Messervy, who were the commanders in chief, successive commanders in chief, and others, Loftus Tottenham, who was commanding the 7th Division, and others. They actually, but that's not very nothing exceptional in that. I mean, the British officers working for the Indian Army also promoted the interest. But as I said, where they were supposed to be neutral or wait till a decision was taken on, say, accession, like in the case of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and they openly struck out for Pakistan. Coming to the Indian Army, we retained a number of British officers after independence. The first two successive commanders in chief were both British. Out of them, the second one, General Roy Pusha, well, ostensibly he promoted India's interests, but his heart was wasn't in it. And I believe that when Nehru and Patel got to know towards the end of '48 that he had been sharing operational information with his counterpart in Pakistan, that's General Gracie. That's the time he had initially been hired for a period of 4 years, from 47 till his term would have got over in 51. But they decided that no, we cannot continue, particularly with this man and generally with other British officers. We must have our own man, our own Indian officer as the commander in chief, and that is why Cariappa was somewhat prematurely elevated to be the commander in chief in January 49, which is what we celebrate as the India's Army Day, 15th January 1949. Then there were others, who actually worked wholeheartedly for India. The most important was General Dudley Russell, popularly known throughout the army as Pasha. He was commanding Delhi and East Punjab Command, which we now know as Western Command, and he took an active part in fostering Indian interests. And people like General S.K. Sinha and others who were worked on his staff, they recall that he invariably talked in terms of we, identifying himself totally with the Indian position rather than you or whatever, and was totally devoted to the Indian cause. But beyond the point, he couldn't do much because the British, in their wisdom, decided that British officers will not enter the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So, for an army commander, fighting a war, a very critical war in an area which he couldn't enter was, that was rather ridiculous. But then the steps were taken. He was made the advisor to the Indian government, and General Cariappa was elevated as the Delhi and East Punjab command general officer commanding in chief in his place early in 1948. Apart from that, there were other advisors, heads of arms and services like Wilkinson, popularly known as Silky Wilkie, who was the Armored Corps advisor, and Hugh, what was his name? Then he was the Harold Williams. Harold Williams, who was the engineer in chief. He, of course, was so devoted to India that after retirement, he settled down in India only and died here. And the other prominent senior British officer who played a major role in shaping Indian Army after independence was Joe Lentane of the Gorkhas, who commanded the Chindits in Burma after the death of Wingate. He set up in 1948. He was selected to set up the Defence Services Staff College at Wellington, which he headed for 7-8 years. And the Indian government was so pleased with services that on the retirement they gave him the honorary rank of Lieutenant General. So you see, it's a sort of middling kind of thing. Person like Roy Boucher, who was the CNC, really had no real stakes or real interest in furthering in India's cause. And on the other hand, you had people like Russell Pasha, who felt it as a duty as a professionals, and they had some loyalty towards India when they worked very hard for India. And then once again coming to Pakistan, it is believed that some British officers did take part in the initial tribal invasion. We have no proof of that, but the British CNC and other officers were fully aware of Pakistani plans. This is the evidence presented by the late General Kargat. He was brigade major of the Banu Brigade in the frontier thing, and one day in September he received a top secret letter addressed to his commander, and since he was the principal, virtually chief of staff, so he opened all these top secret letters. So he opened it up and found that letter from the CNC of the Pakistan Army, General Musavi at that time, and addressed to his commander, Brigadier Murray, and outlining the plan for Operation Gulmarg, which was to be a tribal invasion of Kashmir, with the aim of firstly pressurizing the Maharaja to accede to Pakistan, and secondly, presenting a fait accompli to him by having their troops present there, and making it difficult for him to then remain independent or to accede to India. And it is planned that the governor, British governor of the Northwest Frontier Province, Cunningham, he would raise these tribal lashkars or fighting groups, and they would be led by Pakistani officers on leave in civilian clothes, and would have a nucleus of other officers, JCOs and NCOs to maintain command and control. And I mean, it was a detailed sort of plan, and with great difficulty, General Kalkat managed to get out of Pakistan, come back to India, and gave the information to our senior military commander. He was not believed, but then when the invasion happened, then of course he was called for, and there was denouement. But thing is that the British were fully on board, and they were in the know of all these developments, all these plans. So there you have it. The kind of sort of perfidious conduct of the British, and the sooner they were, one got rid of them from the subcontinent, the better it was for both the dominions.
Absolutely, sir. In fact, to add on to what you have just very rudely explained, Messervy and Akbar Khan shared the headquarters in the same building. So at no point in time could it possibly have been, we have claimed that he didn't know anything about it, or that sort of a thing. Sharing headquarters in the same building would have, completely overruled that point.
No, Akbar Khan was the director of weapons and equipment. I mean, how could the CNC not have known what his own director, person working under him, one of his, one of his senior staff officers was up to? I mean, they knew everything. So they can't get away with saying that this is the work of the Muslim League elements. So they were involved, of course. I mean, now everything is coming out, and people have come out with their stories of how the Pakistan Muslim League ex-INA officers who were living in Pakistan and others were involved. So it was all a giant conspiracy, and if we hadn't acted in time, we would have lost at least Kashmir, if not the whole of J&K.
Whole of J&K. Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for explaining that to us. At the outset, sir, I had said that the Indian Army had to deploy itself in Kashmir with a total loss of intelligence gathering capabilities. It was basically a shot in the dark. We didn't have any assets on the ground or anything of that sort. So, Colonel Sharma, could you please expand on what was our intelligence capability during the time?
We had a half kind of functioning intelligence bureau, and the chief was a guy called Ghulam Muhammad, and he had shifted to Pakistan. And when he shifted to Pakistan, he took whatever files and things were in the department. And there was, like somebody remarked, India was actually deaf, dumb, and blind, something like that, when this thing. So technically, we had intelligence which was almost next to nix. But yes, there was, you see, the Jammu and Kashmir state forces, though they were employed for border works and constabulary and things like that, and it comprised of maximum Muslims. So that was one source that could have been exploited, but unfortunately there was hardly any intelligence which was forthcoming from them also. So I mean, unless somebody has some more inputs, to my mind, any intelligence worthwhile to proceed and to get hold of Kashmir and deploy our forces, or to get to know when the raiders are coming and where are they coming from and what is their composition and things like that, which we got to know, of course, later. But at that point of time, it was quite hazy. I mean, somebody can throw some more light on that.
Uh, I recall reading somewhere, sir, that in fact, not only were we left shortchanged in terms of Ghulam Muhammad taking all the files and all with him, whatever intelligence which we, few assets which we had also were not concentrated towards Kashmir, because it was always envisaged that that's a friendly, princely state, and nobody really foresaw, this sort of a thing happening. So whatever little assets also that we had were concentrated elsewhere, nothing to do with Kashmir at the time. So I think that very nicely illustrates the handicap of intelligence that the Indian Army and the Air Force had to grapple with during those early hours, days, and weeks of the invasion of Kashmir.
That was one of the
Sagar,
reasons.
sir,
I'd like to add something here.
sir,
I'd like
please.
to add something here.
Sir, please, sir, please.
The first indication that we got about the tribal invasion and fighting in Kashmir was an intercept by the signals intelligence to the effect that Gurkhas holding out at Owen. So, the operations directorate, sort of probably the intelligence people also, went through the order of battle of the Indian Army to, sort of locate where could this unit of Gurkhas be and what was happening. And, they this just didn't happen. They just didn't figure, because naturally there was no such unit in the Indian Army, which was located at a place called Owen. Then the second intercept which we got was to the effect that rations for 50 punchis being sent. So now that punchi thing rang a bell, and naturally related to punch and the those the Muslim soldiers from that area, who were also used to be heavily recruited in the Indian Army, and then they were able to zero on that something is up. And then, of course, naturally, the Maharaja then appealed for help, and then the situation came down, and then a team, in fact, probably led by that time Lieutenant Colonel Sam Manekshaw, was in charge of a section of the Operations Directorate, went to Kashmir and went to Srinagar and built up information from the officers of the Jammu and Kashmir State Forces. So that's one of the little inputs.
Thank you so much. Very informative as always. Moving on to the actual invasion of Kashmir, how it panned out, what happened, what ravaged the cities and the towns which were on the path of the invasion route had to face. So, Sagat, could you please elaborate on that? When the tribals invaded, there was a whole lot of plunder, looting, rape, that sort of a thing in places like Uri, in places like Punch, Baramulla is something which is very much there in our consciousness in terms of what happened and what the people had to face over there. So a little bit.
Yes, actually, it's a very unfortunate part of our history. Between the king deciding to join or not to join, the citizens suffered a lot, and it's very well recorded. And this is perhaps what pressurized, the local state forces and the militia to give a very good fight. The story of Brigadier Rajinder Singh, his gallant sacrifice at the bridge, is also something that goes down in the history of independent India, and the nation honored him with the Mahavir Chakra. But if we can go on to the slide, I'll build on it a little further. Please. Sure. So, is it visible? So, So anyhow, so as the atrocities were increasing, and as the Maharaja was coming under a lot of pressure, uh, he did agree to sign an instrument of succession to India, and the conditions were laid down in that. And thereafter, battalions from Delhi were airlifted, starting with the first Sikh, filled in with ranks from the artillery, and thereafter D Company of 4 Kumaon uh, was airlifted from Safdarjung Aerodrome and landed in Srinagar. All this happened between the late October 26th to 28th, and the gradual build up of troops happened at that point of time. A very interesting aspect is of Brigadier Katoch's leadership, who was placed in command of 161 Infantry Brigade. He took a bullet injury and then later was replaced by Brigadier LP Sen, and sorry. So he was replaced by Brigadier LP Sen and given a very good deputy commander in General Harbakh Singh, who was at that time a colonel. And the sort of a structure was loosely built of command and control. And General Kalwan Singh was appointed commander of Jack Force, with Wing Commander Meher Singh appointed the air controller of air operations in JNK. So if you can just put my slide on, please. Yeah. So that is in effect the instrument of surrender that was signed. So you can see how August is struck out to show October. And from there, immediately after that is a picture of Major Somnath Sharma, who was company commander of D Company, 4 Kumaon, who was being airlifted from Safdarjung. You can notice his left arm is in plaster. And going forward, so so Srinagar is where the army built up initially, and the raiders who had been delayed previously in Baramulla and other locations finally built up onto Badgam, and there comes the story of Folk Kumaon, as narrated by General S.K. Sinha, who was a staff officer reporting on the situation from the field, and he was also responsible for maintaining liaison for the Indian Army and the Maharaja. Uh, so Major Somnath Sharma was sent on a fighting patrol, what was then called a fighting patrol of a group of A&D company of 4 Kumaon, along with a company from 1 Para Kumaon. And the interesting story that builds is that they did observe, people who they thought were shepherds or normal villagers, but they did not have any authority to search them or to go into the houses. And so Brigadier LP Sen ordered them to observe the situation and report accordingly. So continuously they were in contact with the brigade headquarters, and as the situation remained normal, uh, Captain Ronnie Woods, who was in command of 1 Para Kumaon, was asked to return to base, followed by Captain H.S. Bolina, who was commanding A Company. And Major Somnath Sharma, who was then left over there, was told to stay on for an hour extra, and he kept observing. So we have to grant the enemy in a way that they also were observing that they were being observed, and as soon as they saw that the numbers had dwindled, they mounted an attack from two three sides, and the brigade was informed immediately, and the battle began. So this was the Battle of Badgam, and over here, the nation's first Paramveer Chakra was won. Citations are available online, and one can read the story. But what is interesting is taking a cue from his company commander who was killed in action. Sipahi Devan Singh picked up the LMG and kept on fighting, and earned a posthumous Mahavir Chakra. His pictures in the center with the Mahavir Chakra, and it's interesting to note that Captain Bolina, who was ordered to go back to the brigade, subsequently earned the Veer Chakra and commanded another battalion and became a brigadier. And his son also joined Pokumau. An interesting point that I would just touch briefly right now. So Captain Ronnie Woods was ordered to reinforce Major Somnath Sharma's positions, and there is a retired Havaldar Himmat Singh who's now 94 plus, and he still recollects very vividly what the situation was, and his picture is also attached below the Mahavir Chakra of Sipahi Devan Singh. So So the interesting point to note here, because we were talking about intelligence and the lack of it and so on. But what is interesting is that Major Somnath Sharma was born in Jammu, and he used to live his childhood days in Srinagar, and he knew this area backwards. And so a person who was born in Jammu was killed in action in Srinagar. So that is something very unique in history as well. So. Uh, that's what I wanted to share on this operation. There is also subsequent operations of 161 Brigade in Battle of Shalating, where Lieutenant Noel David's innovative use of armored cars is won him a Veer Chakra and saved the day, along with a number of infantry battalions that were pressed in. The local battery, field battery, also gave a lot of artillery support, and RAF at that time, gave airstrikes, followed by the advance to Patan on November 8th, and thereafter the detachment of one para command to go on to 50 para brigade as well. And this brigade continued up till Baramulla, where one Sikh was left to defend Baramulla itself, and subsequent operations build on from here. So, I'd, I'd like to close here. Sumit? Sumit?
Sumit? I think we're not getting any.
Just give me a second, sir. Yeah.
Sure. So I've just summarily explained operations of 161 Brigade.
Let it be. Let it be. Yeah. Hello. Am I audible now? I'm so sorry. There was an issue.
Yes,
My
yes.
audio connection got disrupted. Yeah, I'm so sorry for this. Sagar, thank you so very much on Major Sharma's story. It's wonderful, and it's a profound debt of gratitude that this nation owes these men, which I believe can never ever be repaid. The only way we can somehow attempt to do it is to remember them, to honor them, and pass on their story for the sake of posterity. So thank you so much again, Sagar. Now, sir, Bandeep sir, just one thing now, we jumped onto the Battle of Badgam, but chronologically it would be preceded by the induction of one Sikh by the Air Force. And that in itself, in terms of it being an air operation which was conducted at a moment's notice, there was a shortage of aircraft, they were flying in an area which had never been flown earlier. Sir, a word on that. It was an amazing operation. Again, the most insurmountable odds faced them. So, sir, please, something on the induction of one Sikh and how the Air Force enabled that to happen in such a swift and a great manner.
See, contrary to what the propaganda being done nowadays is, the Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, was very keen to send troops there. I mean, that's why he wanted J&K to exceed. And if that was conditional on sending troops there for the help or conditional their acceptance. So obviously, once it exceeded, he had to send troops. I mean, saying anything to the contrary is pure propaganda. But Army headquarters moved fast after the instrument of accession was signed on 26th, and their planning was, at a rapid process. And the nearest infantry unit to Delhi was First Sikh, which was operating, in maintenance of law and order around Gurgaon. And so they were given a warning order and moved to, they took from this the Safdarjung airport using these RIAF Dakotas as well as Dakotas from private aviation companies like Kalinga, Avnish mentioned the name of their owner, Mr. Biju Patnaik, the celebrated politician. And it was still very dicey. They didn't know what was happening on the ground, and the first plane load was told that land only if you're sure that airfield, Srinagar airfield is in our hands. Otherwise, we will divert to Jammu. Anyway, they landed safely and were able to concentrate there. Colonel Rai was met by a couple of liaison officers from the National Conference, including Mr. D.P. Dhar and others, and he built up information. And what he got to know was that the raiders had been delayed by principally by the actions of Brigadier Rajendra Singh and his small force. But now they were at Baramulla, where they had been there for a couple of days, and one didn't know what was they doing after that. So he decided that instead of concentrating his force there to defend the Srinagar airfield, which was the primary task, because that was to be where the rest of Indian forces, 161 Brigade and other troops were to be flown in. He decided to go forward to meet the raiders, and using civilian transport, they managed to get to Baramulla, where he found that the raiders were indulging in loot and plunder and rape, and there was sizable force. So he adopted a blocking position, and by the time the tribals, or should I say, the Pakistani-sponsored force had also got to know of their presence. So they made a frontal attack, which was beaten off. Then, using their favorite tactic, the tribesmen's favorite tactic of outflanking the enemy, they tried to outflank him. And seeing that he was heavily outnumbered, he decided to withdraw to his fallback position. I mean, he had done what he could there. He had delayed them. He had caused attrition, and he had got their measure. I mean, he by knew how many men they were, what weapons, and what was their sort of fighting strength. So the one Sikh withdrew, but unfortunately, during the withdrawal, Colonel Rai was hit by a stray bullet, probably fired by a sniper or somebody, and was killed. And he was awarded very well-deserved Mahavir Chakra. Thereafter, their second in command had also been wounded, Major Sampurna Bachan Singh. So the senior most company commander, that was Major Harvant Singh, Military Cross, he took over. And the fallback position which Colonel Rai had selected at the spillway of the Buller Lake, he brought them there, and he found that this position was not suitable. It could be outflanked and had no depth to it. So he came forward towards Baramulla, and near Patan, he took a position where the road was flanked on both sides by hills, and there he took up an ambush position. So late that night, the vehicle column of the raiders was spotted coming in, and the ambush was, and the casualties were caused, and they they withdrew. Later on, of course, they tried to outflank this position by the force which came in from Gulmarg, made for Badgam, and tried to get to the airfield, which Sagata so brought out so well. And by the time 2 days had elapsed, and the flight was proceeding as per plan, and B.D. Katoch, as Sir pointed out, was in command, and he was wounded, I think, in a couple of days, and replaced by B.D. R.P. Sen. And other units, I think, the second unit was, of course, 4 Kamau. Then later on, first Para Kamau came in, and then some artillery also came in. I mean, in fact, there's a couple of guns from the Patiala Mountain Infantry were there, which were taken over, and I mean, the gunners themselves were kept on, and they provided fire support. And so that is how the Srinagar airfield was saved, the city was saved, and the flying of Indian troops was enabled. Later on, of course, subsequent operations took place, where the Battle of Sheratong, where again it was a very well coordinated combined arms operation with the infantry, the minimal amount of armor which they had, artillery and the air force combined together to inflict a crushing defeat on the raiders and drive them out of the valley. So that comes to the you can say the first phase. Then, of course, other operations started because the Pakistani forces became sort of like an expanding torrent, going in for various things. The force consisting of Gilgit Scouts and deserters from the Jammu and Kashmir state forces and some other locals, some militias which are raised now, came in and invested Skardu and uh, uh, tried to cross the range and through Kargil Pass, make for Leh and capture Ladakh. And on
Sir.
the other side, the our columns had come in from Jammu and they were pushing up north towards Punch. And first Parakamau, as you've seen, came in and from Uri, they through the Haji Pir pass, they made for Punch. But
Punch.
the subsequent follow-up column was ambushed and caused heavy casualties, and that route was blocked. And then, the Bitam Singh Brigade was besieged there for a long time, and ultimately, a major push had been made in from after clearing Nashera, Jhangat, and Rajouri up to Punch. But that saying that ambush in the in the vicinity of the Haji Pass and all enabled the Pakistani to retain this area, Haji Pass, Bidori, and those heights and those tall mountains and all, right till this day. So this would be say the second phase of the GN operations, which carried on till about the middle of 48, and then you can give us a clue about what to discuss next.
Sir. So, like Mandeep sir very rightly pointed out, Sagat, the first phase of the operation, this is where it ended. Once 161 had reached Uri and the bifurcation happened for one battalion to go to Punch and the rest of it to come back. So, on this, Sagat, I'd like you to expand on the actions of 50 Para Brigade, Naushera, Jhangar, and of course,
Sure.
the great man who led 50 Para Brigade, Brigadier Mohammad Usman in VC Posthumous. Brief backdrop and word on that, Sagat.
Surely. Can we move on to
Just
my
a minute, Sumer. Sagat, just please pardon me for the interjection. Mandeep was on Haji Pir Pass. I wonder if we get back to it because, when I was fixing up my audio, I got a message from Group Captain Kuldeep Singh Rana. He is watching our webinar. And
Abhi, sir, could you speak a little louder, sir?
He is watching our webinar. Group Captain Rana, Kuldeep Singh Rana. He's sent a message that his father, Major Kaptan Singh Rana from 23GR, was involved in the Battle of Peer Country. Peer Country, like Mandeep was mentioning, there were some heights on the Haji Pir Pass which had been taken over by Pakistanis, and movement from Poonch side towards Chakoti, Uri was blocked by them, which was later the action of 23GR. And his father, Major Kaptan, led the attack. And he was one of the first companies which to go and capture the heights, which could later on facilitate capture of Peer Country. It was just a height on a Haji Pir Pass, and his father, Major Kaptan Singh Rana, was awarded with the Veer Chakra. So I wanted to bring it out because he specifically sent a message on Haji Pir Pass. He said, "This, if it's not a problem, then kindly cover it." I'm sorry, Sumit.
We lost Peer Country after that. The Pakistani fort in Fort Baloch under a British officer recaptured the past, and 2-3 GR was not there anymore. But
Yeah.
they captured Pandu. Actually, they captured Pandu. So
Okay.
Singh was,
Okay. Okay. Yeah, please, Sumer, kindly carry on.
Sir, sir. So, Sagat, as we were saying, the
Yes.
50 Para Brigade and Muhammad
Yes.
Usman, a little elaboration on that.
Sure. Can we again, if I request, if we can move to my presentation, please?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I'll just look it up.
Right. All right. So, 50 Para Brigade was initially at Gurdaspur, and there's a very interesting anecdote there. One Para Punjab was under command Colonel Paranjpe, who was the first brigade commander of 50 Para when he handed over command to General Arora, who led us in 71 war. Um, so 50 Para Brigade, concentrating at Gurdaspur, had only two battalions. That was the 1 Para and 3 Para Rajput. And like I had said, that our infantry had been divided 2:1 with Pakistan. So both these battalions had recently shed their Muslim companies in exchange for Hindu troops from coming from the Frontier Force Rifles. And so a lot of emotions and a lot of farewells had been given at that point. And thereafter, uh, on the way up to Kashmir, that time Brigadier Pranjpe had injured his foot, and so he reaches uh, beyond Nashera and then goes on for the capture of Kotli, which is marked here. So the initial battle of 50 Para Brigade was led by Brigadier Paranjpe, who took Kotli on November 26th, and thereafter he wanted to go southwards and capture Mirpur. But over here, there are questions of higher direction of war, where this was not permitted for various reasons, which I will not discuss for the moment. But the consequence of not taking Mirpur at that point of time was that thereafter, taking the relief of Poonch or final link up of Poonch was delayed by exactly 1 year. So that was the direct consequence of not taking Mirpur. And so then 50 Para Brigade was sent over to capture of Jhangar, which is on its right. And over there, again, only one battalion, that was 1 Para, not to be confused with 1 Para Kumaon, was there, left behind. And again, Brigadier Paranjpe was requesting for more battalions, at least 3 in full strength, to keep Jhangar in check. But that was also denied to him, and the consequences of losing Nashera were later built out. But what we learn from here is that he had been suppressing the pain of his foot for a very long time, and it needed medical attention, so he was evacuated, and thereafter Brigadier Usman took over from him 50 Para Brigade, and he had come from 77 Para Brigade, and Jhangar fell on December 24th, followed by the arrival of 2 Para on 27th December. And thereafter, the biggest battle of the entire JNK operations happened in Jhangar. And Brigadier Osman was declared the hero of Naushera, and he had left behind 963 enemy dead. So that was a very large figure, and it was a very big mood uplift for the brigade. And subsequently, the recapture of Jhangar was planned with 19 Infantry Division having 2 Rajagay, 4 Dogra, 3 Command Rifles, and 2 Jats in support. And finally, on 14th March, 50 Para Brigade moved out of Naushera, and the number of events happened, such as the capture of Peer Satwan. At the same time, there was a restructuring of command, where General Atma Singh comes in to take over Jammu and Kashmir Division, which was subsequently named 26th Infantry Division.
Infantry.
And a very brave man himself. There was a raid on point 3571. Then in April 16, then followed by a battle of MG Hill in May. Then finally, the ultimate sacrifice of Brigadier Usman in July. So this was the climax of 50 Para Brigade. Very interesting stories that emerged from here is that there was a lack of communication and breakdown of communication channels. So there was a young officer, Captain Lakshman Singh Lahel, who got wounded in the operations in Jhangar and thereafter earned the Veer Chakra. And he gallantly led 20 Division in the East in 1971, and faced the toughest competition in Bangladesh. So there are a lot of linkages with this para brigade, and then going on in 71 war as well with General Arora and General Lakshman Singh Rehel. So this is what I wanted to say about 50 para brigade.
Colonel Sharma, there was an aspect of armored operations also in this particular area. Could you elaborate on that, sir?
Yeah. Before that, just to add on to what Sagat said, Brigadier Usman, since he decided to stay on in India, he was declared a kafir by the Pakistanis, and they placed a bounty of 50,000 during that time for anybody who could capture him. This is just out of the archives. Yeah, but coming to the tank action, that the tank action in Rajouri was the first tank action after independence. Rajouri is about 45 kilometers from Nowshera, and the road. I visited last. We went to Lam when I was a second lieutenant in 1981. And I saw that road at that time. So it is a blacktop road at that time, but there's a lot of curves. I could imagine what it was in 1948 when the road from Pathankot to Srinagar was a dirt track. It was gravel, unsealed top, and from Manali to Leh was a caravan track, and this was in a bad shape. Major Aga Humayun, Mandy would know this Pak historian. He said, culprits was Pakistan government who left the militia facing tanks with bolt action rifles. And they could not imagine actually. And later on, Rajouri was to become the springboard for the final relief of Punch. Punch was a thorn right in the beginning. On the 14th of August, almost all shops were flying Pakistani flags in Punch. And it was a thorn. It had to give a problem. But this action, which I'll just narrate to you, of Central India Horse, they were equipped with Stuarts. It was called Honey Tank. When it was introduced, it's an American tank, and when it was introduced in Second World War in 1941, one of the British drivers said he remarked, "It's a Honey." It is a 37 gun and a cannon. And I think that time Mandy would know better with the Stuart Mark III or Mark IV with the Central India Horse, as also with 7th Cavalry. 7th Cavalry Squadron was in Akhnur. There were two squadrons of CIH, one was at Jhangar and one was at Nowshera. And the CEO of Central India Horse was actually a youngster, 27-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Zorawar Singh. I think he was the youngest CEO. I mean, these days you are getting CEOs of lesser age. When I commanded, I was almost 40, and he was 27 years of age at that time. And he took control, and before he could make any progress, he had an air recce of the route from Nowshera to Rajouri. And he realized that it is going to take time because there are so many curves. I remember my regiment, though I was on staff I think in 1998, 99, that was the time when some Vijayans were taken on that road, actors, pillboxes and all. Those time Vijayans were getting phased out. But the feedback was that it was a big issue because there are so many defiles, turns, bridges, and then Tavi River and things like that. So, the second lieutenant R.R. Rane, from the engineers, he was tasked to prepare the road for the tanks to move from Nowshera, Jhangar to Rajouri. And this youngster got wounded. He was moving ahead of the tanks, and he was, of course, later on awarded Paramveer Chakra for his outstanding job in getting hold of the thing. But EIH was put as a vanguard to the brigade attack with the, I think it was first Kumaon and Fort Dogra. And you see, when you have a look at Rajouri, General Harvijay Singh from Signals, he's a friend of mine. He's written a beautiful book, very concise book on battles, India-Pakistan battles. He's taken it from 47, 48 right till the end. And he very lucidly he's described, and very good photographs, though they are black and white. But he's given a picture of Rajouri. It is like a V. It is surrounded by Tavi River, and the habitation is within that V. And so what Zorawar did was that he, instead of following the road, he followed the bridge, the Tavi River, the contours of Tavi River. It was not easy. It is about 400 meters when it starts earlier, but when it cruises on to Rajouri, it gets down to about 100 meters in width and about 3 to 4 meters feet depth, but gushing water, cold. It was the month of February, March, when the things were taking place. So finally they reached there was, April. But then he crossed the river about 8 times. And, one of the intercepts which later came, and General Harvijay has given it in his book. He says the radio intercept said there are buffaloes starting from Changis to Rajouri. The Tavi River is full of buffalo. Buffaloes was the code name for the tanks. And they closed in to this thing, Rajouri. There was a Barwali ridge there. They pounded Barwali. It is a dominating feature around Rajouri. It was being dominated by Paki troops, and they pounded Barwali range, and they also acted as the target indication. Their high explosive rounds were target indicators for Tempest aircraft to provide close air support. It was a very well coordinated operation, and say on the 13th of April, that is Baisakhi, enemy was finally thrown out of Rajouri, and like Humayun mentioned, that it proved to be a springboard for the final relief of Poonch. And this was, we celebrate as the first armored battle after independence that took place by the Central India Horse.
Thank you so much, sir. Very illuminating again. And
if I may make a strong point.
Please, sir.
Incidentally, my father served in that push towards Rajouri from Nashera Jangat, serving with a bomb squadron company. In fact, the same company in which Second Lieutenant R.R.
Rane was from.
Yeah.
So that's
wonderful, sir.
There are two more officers I want to talk about from the Central India Horse. They're outstanding in themselves. First is, Colonel Satish Chandra Joshi. He got his first Veer Chakra in this operation. And thereafter, as a CO in 1965, he relieved Barki, capture of Barki, and then laid up his life in the defense of the nation and got a Veer Chakra bar in 1965. Another officer is, Colonel A.N. Jatar, who got a Mavi Chakra in this operation. And what is interesting is that, his father had earned a DSO, CIE, and knighthood as an IMS officer. And as a doctor, he had taken over a company when the company commander was killed. So, subsequently also I'll be talking about this, that, how gallantry is a tradition in the Indian Armed Forces. And a lot of our officers, Jawans, DCOs, everybody, follows in their father's footsteps. And CIH is a very good example of that. So I just wanted to highlight it.
Absolutely. The army is all about tradition. It's all about, following in steps already laid before us. Thank you so much, Sagat. Very illuminating again. Carrying on, the siege of Poonch was probably Colonel Sharma also pointed out, the biggest thorn on our sides. So, Sagat, a brief word about what the siege of Poonch was all about. How was Poonch supplied when we were surrounded from all the sides, dominating heights, and all of those things. Nightmare for a guy who has to do the LOC work here, lines of communication work here. Would be a nightmare for any supply officer, anything of that sort. So, a brief talk on Punch, please?
Sure. If we go back to my presentation, please. Yeah. Okay. So coming towards Punch, just before we reach Punch, I just want to show you the family of Major General Rajinder Singh, who had got a Mavi Chakra in Jangar, which we just discussed, and later on a bar in 1965. His son got a mention dispatch in 65 war, and the second son got a V Chakra in 71 war. So continuing from the traditions of gallantry in the Indian Armed Forces. But going forward, I'll take you to Punch. So Punch was a very important town. As Colonel Avnish has already suggested that there were riots and protests going on and a lot of disturbances over there. There were also 25,000 refugees, including women and children, who wanted to join India, and there was a desperate situation over there, and it was decided with great difficulty to finally go and take Punch itself. The operations in itself was called punching, because at that time punch spelling was punch, and the British tradition was still very alive at that point of time. So punching, depending on how the officer took it, but both ways it meant the same thing. So in this picture, I've got General Kulwant Singh in the center with Brigadier Pritam Singh, who was a local brigadier over there. Uh, Colonel Dharam Singh and Colonel Palit, all famous officers of that time. And I've shown the gallantry awards, and one cannot forget the efforts of Air Commodore Meher Singh, DSO, DFC from World War II, and thereafter MVC. So he initiated what was called punching by airdrop of supplies and later on even guns and so on. I'll just give you a background of that information as well. So Poonch initially was held by Brigadier Krishan Chand of the Jammu and Kashmir State Forces, and they had about roughly about 2.5 battalions of variable strength, but they were widely dispersed. So when the rebels mounted an attack on them, their positions started suffering, and at that point of time, one para command, which I had told you earlier, had detached itself from 161 Brigade in relief to, going back to 50 Para Brigade. They were sent to Poonch as the first regiment battalion itself to enter Poonch, and that time Lieutenant Colonel Pritam Singh was the commander, and he took in. And at that point, again, typical of newly independent nation, the state forces commander was a brigadier. So it was, after about 3 months, it was decided that Colonel Pritam Singh would wear the local rank of brigadier to, avoid the issues of, rank and equivalency. But basically, the idea was that the Indian Army would have larger resources and more capability to bring in troops and supplies and so on. So he was elevated brigadier in February with his 2IC Lieutenant Colonel Dharam Singh taking over command in February 8th. And the local militias were also raised around November 47. These were the forerunners to become what is today known as the Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry. And Colonel Palit, who was then the Gurkha commander of Gurkha Battalion commander of 3 GR, has written a lot about them. So that is available. So coming back to the point, Poonch was surrounded from all sides. There was a problem of food and supplies going out, and around December 13th, when Pakistanis brought up their guns, the IAF brought up mountain guns for us, and that provided a little bit of relief. Being a para battalion in Punch on their own, they wanted to have some adventure. So they wanted to rein in the new year with 3 attacks on villages in East Beta, and there are 3 villages that were being attacked simultaneously. Only one, that was Rabakewali, could not be held. And thereafter, on Jan 4th, 39GR, a company of 39GR was joined, and .5425 was captured, which was just 2 miles northeast of Punch. So my unit of reference here will remain in miles, because entirely J&K operations was measured in miles at that point of time. We converted to metric a little after. but the references remain such. So I want to keep it as intact as they are. So, point 5425 was captured northeast of Punch on Jan 19th. There are between Jan 20th to 30th, they withstood 6 counterattacks. And, I want to point out the bravery of paratrooper Man Singh on January 25th. So his almost half of his platoon was written off with men laying down their lives. So he laid such a gallant defense and posthumously earned the Mahavir Chakra. And thereafter, uh, operations for grain collection were reinitiated as the stocks were reducing. And Khanetar Ridge was an area above a village called Khanetar. So a lot of raids were carried out from Poonch center to Khanetar and so on. In one of these actions, Sardar Malkiyat Singh Brar was wounded. He refused evacuation and continued to give support to his withdrawing troops, and again earned the posthumous Mahavir Chakra. Colonel Dharam Singh, who was the CO at that point of time, he removed the machine gunner from his post and picked up the machine gun and fired himself. So that tells you the level of officer leadership from this battalion. Then two additional companies of 39GR joined up on 4th and 10th of between 4th and 10th of February, and on 22nd March, 25 pounders were airlifted and brought to Punch. So that gave much more firepower to that garrison. And 8th Kashmir Infantry Battalion was brought up, and between May 17th to 18th, gallant action by the Gurkhas. Their commanding officer, Colonel Palit, took a grenade shrapnel to his face. He was given a Veer Chakra for his actions. There were 11 men killed in action and 29 wounded. This was for the capture of point 4036. And thereafter, there were subsequent actions in the hills surrounding Punch, where one Kumaon on 29th May, one Kumaon Para on 29th May lost 17 men killed in action, 35 were wounded, and 9 were taken prisoners. And then it shows you that the consolidation of Punch took a lot, cost a lot of in terms of men and material. On one of the days, the artillery has known to fire a number of rounds, which I will not mention for now. But thereafter, Suran Valley was taken, and the whole boundary of Poonch was expanded. The final plan, when it was decided to finally take over Poonch and uh, uh, establish Indian hold on them, there was General Srinagesh who made the master plan, and it involved the capture of Peer Badechar, which is northeast of Jhangar and at about 5,400 feet. One by 1st Battalion of 1st Gurkha Rifles was also part of this operation, and then thereafter, it was realized that much more is required, and as the army got free from the north, more was pushed downwards, and a force called Durga Force under command of Brigadier Yadunath Singh was raised, and it was almost of a division size. And an operation called Operation Easy was launched between 7th to 23rd November 1948, and thereafter, Battle of Bember Gully, Battle of Medhar were fought, and then the ceasefire took place. So I'll just take you through some of the photographs of that period, and it's very interesting. Uh, yeah. So these are the men in Punch at that point of time, followed by. So this is the family of Colonel Dharam Singh, who was commanding one para Kumaon. So on the top left is his father, Subedar Major Ujala Singh, who was the Subedar Major, honorary captain retired from 4 Kumaon. Thereafter is Colonel Dharam Singh, who got a Mavi Chakra for the operations in Punch. And thereafter, his sons also joined the battalion. One became a brigadier and a VSM and commanded the battalion as well. And so did his second son, who was right up to the late 80s in the battalion. And I want to show a tradition that emerges from JNK. The CO's oil paintings hang in the regiments with their medals. Everyone has almost donated their medals to the regiment. And what is interesting, if you see in the bottom right, the regiment has got, the battalion has got 5 unit citations. So they're all mounted with honor in the anteroom of these regiments and battalions. I'll show you another battalion which is very interesting. Before that, there was the BHM of One Kumaon Para, who was given a battlefield commission and became a lieutenant in 1947. His son joined the battalion, commanded it, and became a brigadier and a VSM. And then 2010, gifted the samurai sword of his father to the battalion, which still hangs in the mess with a lot of pride. And then this is Havaldar Himmat Singh, then who had been part as a Nayak, I mean as a Sipahi, a paratrooper, with Captain Ronnie Woods, who had first gone to relieve Major Somnath Sharma in Battle of Badgam, and today he's a 94-and-a-half-year-old retired soldier. And we visited him in his home, and that's what he looks like today at this point. Um, then I wanted to also show you. Yes, so this is General Yadunath Singh, who was that time a brigade commander, 19th Infantry Brigade commanding Durga Force, and he got shot in the leg and wounded in action from got a gallant Mahavir Chakra for overall command and leadership and gallantry in battle. And he was relieved by Major General Khanolkar, who was that time a brigadier, and Brigadier Khanolkar then had to consolidate the entire garrison and operations in Poonch. So. One of the lasting contributions, which is also very interesting, of General Khanolkar's family is his wife, Mrs. Savitri Bai Khanolkar. She was very well read and an artist and a dancer, and knew a lot about Indian mythology and spirituality. And she's written a number of books and so on. But she's also designed all the major gallantry awards of India and the General Service Medal 1947-62. So, as India became a democratic republic, there was a sense of democracy, and every man who participated in those operations continues to wear the General Service Medal 47 on his chest. And her husband, General Khanolkar, then became GOC Delhi area in 1950 when India was declared a republic. And on the right, you can see him with General Rajendra Prasad, the first president of India. So that's a very interesting cross link between Poonch operations and gameplay and so on.
Well, thank you, Sagat. Really illuminating, very gripping, and again, treasure trove of information. Before we move on to the next part, where Mandeep sir will be taking us up north to Leh, there's a small anecdote I read. I wanted to share that. The Air Force had been providing a lot of close air support to the Army in the Poonch area. We had Tempests coming in from the number 7, 8, and 10 squadrons. We had a detachment of Spitfires at Srinagar. But these aircraft were made for the role they were particularly deployed in, especially the Tempest. But interestingly, and this I think is an illustration of the quick thinking and use a word jugaad in our country. The Dakotas of 12th Squadron also conducted bombing runs on positions around Poonch at night by dropping bombs from from the rear door of the aircraft, which is and it is said that these bombing runs and these attacks were rather successful. Also, they spooked the enemy, they had them running. But the point which I'm trying to make is, so the point which I was trying to make here is that using a Dakota, flying it at low level and dropping a bomb and doing it all at night again shows the grit of these men more than anything else. It's a very slow lumbering aircraft, very easy to hit with anti-aircraft fire, with light small arms also. So this was an anecdote which I thought would be worth sharing for our audience also. So going on, sir, to the last part of the discussion, and of course last phase of the war also, was the fight which took place up north. The airlift to Leh, the relief of Leh, and the actions fought at Zojala Pass. So, Mandeep sir, I would love you to join in on this, sir. Starting with, sir, the Leh airlift.
Well, you see, Ladakh was the glittering prize up for the grabs for the Pakistanis. So, using a mix of regulars, paramilitary forces like the Gilgit Scouts, and some J&K state forces deserters, as well as tribals. They tried to grab Ladakh by coming down south from Skardu, and captured Dras, Matayan. They established a presence on the Zojila Pass, which is the gateway to Ladakh, and were hoping to exploit towards Leh. It was then that, taking a risk, aircraft were landed at at Leh, and some troops, from 28 GR were, landed there and, made up into a garrison to defend Leh. On the other side, coming in from the Rohtang Pass side, the troops of 2 Dogra were also brought in, and a small garrison was established at Leh to defend it against the Pakistani attacks. But the point was that this garrison had to be relieved, and although they were supplied by air, but they had to be relieved. The Ladakh had to be recaptured, and for that purpose, 77 Para Brigade, which was formerly part of the Chindits in Burma, was sent to capture Zojila. Zojila, the Pakistanis were occupying dominating heights. It would be very difficult to dislodge them from there. And in September, 77 Para Brigade, and commanded by Brigadier K.L. Atal, made 2 attempts to try and dislodge them. But, because of the terrain, because of the commanding heights which the Pakistanis were occupying and other factors, they were not able to do so. So, we had our most brilliant general there commanding the Srinagar division, SRA division, which is now 19 division, General Thimaya. So, General Thimaya came up with the idea of using tanks. And 7th Cavalry, which are operating around Aknoor, were asked to send a squadron of Stuart tanks to aid in the capture of Zojila. And this move was kept totally secret and under conditions of great secrecy. The one squadron of Stuart tanks of 7th Cavalry were moved to Baltal, just short of the pass and in a concentration area. While on the move, their turrets were removed so as to act as camouflage, and they were sort of camouflaged to resemble these Bren gun carriers, and also lighten the weight, because the bridges of the Chenab and other smaller rivulets and all were not really able to take that much weight, and even the tanks had to be winched across so that the vibrations wouldn't damage the bridge. Anyway, they were able to concentrate there at Baltal, and by about the middle of October, and the attack was launched. But then the bad weather intervened. There was snow. It was continuously snowing for the next 10 days. So the attack kept on being postponed. Ultimately, on the 1st of November, the one troop led by Jamdar Kartar Singh, who also got a Veer Chakra, led the squadron of 61st Cavalry. I'm so sorry, 7th Cavalry.
7th Cavalry.
Up towards the heights. They achieved total surprise, and the enemy was so demoralized that it was like virtually abandoning their positions. And of course, there was Raj was also saying, and still snowing, but they were able to. And then along with them, they had 1-5 Gurkha rifles and 1st Patiala, and they were able to drive the Pakistani off the Kargil heights and the thing. And in the run up to the attack, the track leading up to Zojila had been developed by the engineers in a superhuman effort to take tanks and trucks. And once they were on top of the pass, then the rolling down, and it took days of fighting, but they were able to take Dras, liberate Matayan, and then Kargil, and then subsequently relieve the siege of Leh, and therefore thereby retain reconquer Kargil Ladakh for India. And this is, this is an operation in which a lot of effort put in, and not only by senior officers and planners, but by every man. And praise can be too high for all the soldiers who took part in this operation. And by about the 15th or 15th of November, the siege of Leh had been lifted. And thereafter, as we know that on 1st of December, in 49, the ceasefire took place, came into effect. And also, the other operations, subsequent operations in Western Kashmir, from Uri onward, or northwards of Uri, across the Nastachun Pass, Tangdhar, all those areas were also liberated by 160.
Titwal.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Commanded by Brigadier Harbaksh Singh. So,
Harbaksh.
the end of December 48, sorry, we stood at having liberated a lot of the areas. And then, of course, the other areas like Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, and Gilgit-Baltistan were still liberated. But the government in its way, agreed to the ceasefire, and there the matter stands at the moment.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much, sir. A small bit of info I'd add here, and Sagat, you also please feel free to add. Is the sapper contribution in making the road up to Zojila Pass tankable? I happen to be the son of a Madras sapper. My father has served with 4 Engineer Regiment, which was earlier known as 13 Field Company, which had made the road tankable. And I have had the honor of being present at Zojila Pass on the 2nd of November back in 2001, when a memorial had been made by 4 Engineer Regiment in honor of Captain Vadera, who had improved the road later on in the 50s. So the thing which I would personally want to add is that this was probably the first time our staunch, gallant Tambis had worked in this terrain. Coming from South India, they hadn't seen snow, they hadn't seen cold weather, and more than anything else, they hadn't served in a high altitude terrain, in a high altitude situation. So for them to have worked in that area in those conditions and widen that road to enough and reinforce it enough for it to be able to take the weight of a Stuart tank, a squadron of tanks, was, I think, singularly in itself a great feat of construction and a great feat in combat engineering. Anything you would want to add on this, Sagat, on the sapper aspect of it?
I know we are short of time. I just request about 5 to 6 minutes. There's a lot of Zojila.
No problem at all, Sagat.
It's a personal story that I really want to share, right. Okay,
Absolutely.
so Zojila in itself, it means a pass of blizzards, and it's at 11,575 feet, 64 miles. Again, I'm talking in miles because of the time at that point, right? 64 miles east of Srinagar, and it was called the gateway to Ladakh, like Mr. Bajwa just said. But besides Ladakh, even Tibet was there, and let me just remind everyone, at that point of time, India had Indian Army detachments in Tibet collecting revenue from there in 47, 48. A lot of our territory is, still over there, and that's another story altogether. So it is strategically important for us to get these zones. So if you go on to my presentation, we are on our presentation, right? So a lot of you would already know that, Zojila, Dras, Kargil, Leh till date, in fact, right now also, it's a very hot topic. Though a very cold place, but it's a hot topic, right? Okay. So
it's always been.
Yes, it's been a bone of contention, and when I tell you the story of what actually happened in sequence, you'll understand why a lot of people are after it, right? Okay, so we had 77 Para Brigade under command Brigadier K.L. Atal. He was given 3 Jat, again of 1965 fame. He was given 1st Wave Gurkha Rifles, 5 Maratha Light Infantry, 30 Field Battery, Jammu and Kashmir Battery, and a company of 4 Jat to support this initiative. There were detachments of 13 Field Company engineers, an MMG platoon from One Mahar, a supply section, a main dressing station from 83 Field Ambulance Company, a number 4 surgical team, and also 1 Patiala State Forces. So the idea was to break through Zojila, capture Kargil, and then link up with Leh. The entire operation was conceived by Field Marshal Karyappa, and he had called it Operation Duck, which was later renamed Operation Bison. I assume that some of the plan was compromised, and therefore the rename. but he is documented to have said that the name will change, but the operation will continue. So the enemy had dug himself in at about 16,000 feet height with support of 3.7-inch howitzers, MG platoons, and mortars. And our infantry had to climb those positions, fight them with bayonets, and get them out. So, the first attempt to take, and the deadline was 1st October to capture Zojila. The first attempt was made on 5th September, it failed. The second attempt was made again on 13th and 14th September, again it failed. And this was entirely an infantry operation at that point of time. Problems of terrain, snow, cold, difficulty, etc., were all cited, which is very understandable. And I will tell you some statistics which are even more shocking. But then, the question of artillery and air support being available was always there. Uh, our commanders on field tried outflanking maneuvers, frontal assaults, everything failed. Um, Havaldar Mukand Singh Mahavir Chakra held on his position for 48 hours and caused significant delay to the enemy in a 2:1 ratio where the enemy was double his strength. So, these are the kind of examples that were really highlighted at that point of time. General Shamaya, who is the field commander, he recalled, as I said, I will come back to this point earlier, that he recalled his experience from Burma, where he had himself witnessed the role of armor in
Armor.
operations, and he called for 7th Cavalry or any available armor that could come in. Now, the story that builds from here is called Operation Sparrow. Sparrow was General Rajinder Singh's other name, which everyone calls him very fondly in the armed forces. So, 7th Cavalry, which had already been spread out in battle of Srinagar, Naushera, Rajouri, Jammu, were again now called upon to come to Zojila. Now, this battalion, the regiment itself was also widely spread. Its headquarters and one of its squadrons, which was the Armored Car Squadron. So this is again a difference between a normal armor regiment and a light cavalry. They also have different composition. They have a rifle troop. They have motor sections. They have jeeps with machine guns and so on. So the structure of a light cavalry regiment is different. So 7th Light Cavalry had its regiment headquarters, and one squadron of armored cars sitting at Demla armored car sitting at Baramulla, and between the region of Baramulla, Uri, and the tank squadron was sitting in Akhnur. So there was, since I said that there was a renaming of the operation, there was a suspicion that the plan may have leaked. And the bridges, as Mr. Bajwa had already pointed out, their capacity was only 5 to 9 tons, and the Stuart tank, although honey and very light, it was 14 tons, so that could not be supported. A decision was taken, and Sapper Namdev Pawar from 22 Field Company and Tukaram Godse of 37 Assault Field Company. It's a heartwarming story to hear that when these bridges from Srinagar were being expanded, that was the only route to Zojila. They were asked to cut the ribbon by their div commander and GOC. So that soldier and officer relationship, which very nicely comes out from this operation, is also very much there, and their names are recorded. Then thereafter, the engineers also built a Bailey Bridge ahead at Chenab at one of the points. Meanwhile, Colonel Sharakdev Singh Jamwal, um, sorry, just let me go to the previous. Yeah. So Colonel Sharakdev Singh Jamwal, at that time a captain, he was commanding C Squadron of 7th Cavalry based at Noor, and he was asked to bring up his tanks for the operations in Zojila. And along with him was Captain D.S. Chowdhury, who had just come back from a course in EME instruction. And they both decided that, the turrets of these tanks had to be removed. One was for the weight, and one was also for
Arjun?
and the second reason was for deception. These tanks were shown as T16 infantry carriers, so that if any observation or any enemy intelligence was picking this up, they would assume that these were just infantry moving. And this 300-mile journey was completed in 10 days, beginning 5 October, ending 15th October. And special mention, of course, of engineers Major Thangarajan, who had built the tank track, and he was asked to again make a harbor for these tanks, a squadron of tanks to actually stop on the roadside. So he fell short of men. So first if Gurkhas, first Patiala, fourth Rajput, and Jammu and Kashmir militia, along with their pioneer sections, were asked to support in this construction work. 25-ton explosives, bulldozers, everything was used to make this tankable road. And Naib Subedar Thanga Velu of 13th Field Company earned a lot of reputation in this action. When this track was completed, it was named Major Thangarajan Road, and in his honor. And then thereafter, operations commenced. One mention of 51 parafield battery. It was called Khandani battery because it was raised in 1779, and now it was under command. Then it was under command Major B.S. Gupta. He had 825 founders with him, and he had also been linked up, married up with J&K Mountain Battery, 30 field battery, and they were called Composite Regiment under command Colonel Gyan Singh. And from there, so you can understand that the kind of like Mr. Bajwa said, that enough compliments cannot be showered on our men and officers who work together to achieve this objective. And so 7 Cavs rifle troops were moved up along with their tanks, and on first, so the objective was initially 1st October. That had failed. It was forwarded to 31 October. That also was not successful. And then on 1st November 48,
Okay.
finally, General Themaya called Colonel Sharad Jamwal, who's pictured in the bottom left over here. He's now 96 years old. And he told him that I want your sea squadron at Gumri. Sorry. Just a minute. So he wanted this squadron at Gumri. And about 1,000 rounds of artillery were fired. And one Patiala and one First Wave Gurkhas were joined up. And on 2nd November, different villages were captured. And by 3rd November, our Press Information Bureau had already passed the success of our armored operations in Zojila. A very interesting story of Jamadar, now Honorary Captain retired Kartar Singh. He got a V Chakra and Bar in this operation. So his first V Chakra was supporting infantry in Punjab on the way up to Jammu and Kashmir, which was cited by the infantry battalion company commander. And then his second V Chakra citation went by Colonel Jamwal, who's pictured over here. So both these men earned a lot of reputation in this battle. Now, interestingly, Colonel Jamwal's father was mentioned in dispatches in World War One in Africa, and his picture's on the left. And that's Captain Jamwal in 1945 in Japan, and now as a 96-year-old. He was only mentioned in dispatches for all the actions that he had undertaken, and largely evicting the enemy from those places. Previously, when the infantry had failed, it was this armor attack and the presence of armor which had actually unnerved them. And then a lot of artillery fire, 1,000 rounds had been fired, a lot of engineer support, a lot of signal support, and so on. Conclusively, one Patiala emerged with 7 Mahavi Chakras, 17 Veer Chakras, and 39 mentioning dispatches in this operation. 5 Marathas got 1 Veer Chakra and 13 mentioning dispatches. 4 Rajput, which is another very interesting story, was under command Colonel Girdari Singh, who was a Veer Chakra, Military Cross, and Bar. And this man was put up for a Victoria Cross in World War II, but didn't get it. He got 2 military crosses, a number of mentioned dispatches, and finally got a Veer Chakra in Zojila operation. The sad part of his life story is that his son, Second Lieutenant Chhatrapati Singh, he was killed in action in 1962 in the defense of Sela, which is CO downwards, all being killed in action. So that is a kind of contribution, and now you can see his other son and grandchildren, great grandchildren, pictured on the image on the bottom right. Going forward, the first is Gurkha Rifles under command, that time Colonel, later Major General A.S. Pathania, earned the Mahavir Chakra. You can see the link up of tanks and infantry in this oil painting from the regiment, from the battalion. And then his son also became a general, General N.S. Pathania, and commanded his father's battalion. So as I said earlier, gallantry is a tradition, and father sons being in the same battalion, and the whole story thereafter, and how the regiment honor this service is also very interesting. But I want to also
Absolutely.
bring to point the sacrifices that were made to get Zojila for India. 350 men are reported to have suffered frostbite. And similarly, throughout the operations, as I mentioned, 7 Cavalry have been in a number of locations. They only came back with 1 Mahavir Chakra, 6 Veer Chakras, and 11 mentioned dispatches. And going backwards, Colonel Jamwal, the same operations that he did to get Zojila, In 1962, he was asked to repeat it in Bomdila, and he was the last man covering the withdrawal of 4 Infantry Division. And so that is the kind of stories that emerged from this operation. And lastly, I just want to conclude by two lessons that were drawn by the Indian Army in Zojila was the behavior of equipment in cold weather, and secondly, the element of surprise and effective offensive action. So I think we are taking a cue now from these learnings as well, of proper offensive action and maintaining surprise. But finally, I just want to come back to this point of Havaldar Himmat Singh, who I shown you earlier, who's in his late 90s. See the sacrifice that these men gave for us. And this is just a copy of his discharge certificate, which was given to him later, where he had suffered cerebral concussions on his way to Punch from Srinagar. So in one of the battle actions. So and lastly, what really wraps up the entire experience of the military families who contributed in this operations is the fact that they actually hold on to newspapers, any article, any record, anything that comes which mentions something about their father, their brother, their uncle, their son, nephew, any whichever way they're related, and it's a matter of great honor to remember the service and sacrifice. It feels much better that when other people also share that emotion. So I'm really grateful that
Absolutely, Sagat.
we've had this discussion today, which is Independence Day, where we remember all of them.
Absolutely, Sagat. I started with saying that the debt of gratitude that we owe our men in uniform is something which we can never ever repay. The maximum which we can and we should, and I hope to continue doing this with this eminent panel, is to remember them and remember them for posterity. I would now just wind up this discussion by the final conclusion. The war ended on the 1st of January 1949. The Prime Minister of the time chose to go to the United Nations for a brokered ceasefire before the army could achieve the decisive victory that it was on the cusp of achieving, which would have realigned the border to a great extent. The repercussions of that particular ceasefire, they still reverberate in our country. They still resonate in our country very much. The situation up north in Kashmir is something which we see, talk about almost daily. And the army continues to do a stellar job across the state, whether it's on the LOC, whether it's in the Ladakh Kargil sector, or whether it's with our neighbors on the other side. The Air Force also continues doing the stellar job of air maintaining them, keeping up casualty evacuations, keeping up supplies, again, flying in the toughest of conditions, adverse weather, altitude, whole lot of other reasons which aviators would be better able to explain. But suffice it to say that as difficult an environment for an Air Force and an Army to operate as can be with the jointsmanship that they have. I would thank everybody on the panel for joining us, for taking out the time and having this very, very illuminating and enjoyable discussion. I think we should continue doing this and keep spreading the knowledge and the information that we have. As students of military history, one learns every day. I've learned a couple of things today from everybody here. So I would again thank everyone with the bottom of my heart for taking out the time and sharing their stories, their experiences, and their knowledge, most importantly. If you could just give me a second, if there are any questions from the audience, we could just probably take them up and see. There is a question here by one Mr. Kuldeep Rana. If Gandhiji was alive for a few more years after 1948, knowing his closeness to Jinnah, could he have forged a better relationship between India and Pakistan? I would leave it to anyone in the panel to take this on.
Well,
Though it's not a question which relates to military history, which is our forte.
Asking for a bit too much. I don't think Jinnah anything or under any kind of pressure or whether he had any relationship with Gandhi or whatever. I think he was a severe of Gandhi, and I don't really see a thing. And he was bent upon getting the best deal for himself and the biggest country he could hope for. I mean, he wanted to follow Punjab. They were laid claim to the Nicobar Islands. They laid claim to the Minicoy Islands, which we now know as Lakshadweep. And you remember in 61 when we liberated Goa, Pakistan asked for a share in Goa also. And of course, they wanted Hyderabad to merge with them, and they wanted to accede to them anyway. So I don't think we could trust in generosity or good spirit in any way. So I mean, let's give up those illusions.
Thank you so much, sir. Very nicely put, and I hope that answers the question. It's a view which even I personally share. Thank you so much, sir. Let me just see if there are any other questions, then we can wind it up. Anything else? Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining us, Mr. Bajwa.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
I hope to do this again, and I'll be bothering you in a couple of weeks again with another story, another war, and another narration of grit, color, valor, and courage. Thank you, sir. A very happy Independence Day to everyone here. Thank you, sir. Jai Hind. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sagar. Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you all.
Okay, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Wonderful.